Hello friends, welcome back to our YouTube channel Doctor's Corner. Today we are going to discuss about muscle spindle. Okay, it is very important in the subject physiology in the section of the nervous system. Many a times in theory exams it has been asked as a 3 marks question. Draw a neat and label diagram of muscle spindle. Okay, it's like this. So we are going to discuss about the muscle spindle today. So first we will discuss what exactly is this muscle spindle, what is the structure of muscle spindle, and what are the functions of the muscle spindle. Okay, briefly about the functions of the muscle spindle. So first, what is muscle spindle? You know, we have so many skeletal muscles in our body. Okay, so just with the help of this red color, I am drawing a line diagram of the skeletal muscle. Consider this as a skeletal muscle, any muscle like a biceps muscle, triceps muscle and all. Okay. Now, these muscle fibers which are present in the skeletal muscles, these muscle fibers are called as extrafusal fibers. What it is called as? Extrafusal muscle fibers or just extrafusal fibers, or more specifically extrafusal muscle fibers. Now, in this muscle, that is skeletal muscles, there are certain sensors or the stretch receptors which will respond to the change in the length of the muscle. That is, whenever a skeletal muscle is stretched, okay, suppose this is in a contact state, now I am stretching it, that is change in the length of the muscle. So this change in the length of the skeletal muscle is detected by one structure which is present in the muscle, and that structure it is called as muscle spindle. Okay. So with the help of this blue color, I am just highlighting this thing. So there are stretch receptors which are present in the muscles. That stretch receptors which are present in the muscles is simply known as muscle spindle. Hope the concept is clear. What is muscle spindle? Muscle spindle is nothing but these are the stretch receptors which are present inside the muscle, which will detect the what it will detect? Two important things: change in the length of the muscle fibers. So whenever the length of the muscle fiber is changed, either increases or decreases, that is sensed by this muscle spindle, that is, it is known as stretch receptors. It is stretch sensitive. Okay. So one thing is change in the length. Second one is not only it will detect the change in the length, it will also detect the rate of change in the length of the muscle fibers. Okay. At what speed the muscle is changing the length. Okay. Rate of change of the length of the muscle fibers. Change of length of the muscle fibers. Okay. So this is the definition. So muscle fibers are stretch receptors which will detect the change in the muscle length. Now, the fibers which are present inside the muscle spindle, it is simply known as intrafusal muscle fibers or intrafusal fibers. So, hope the concept is clear. What is extrafusal muscle fibers and intrafusal muscle fibers? Extrafusal fibers are skeletal muscle fibers, which we have studied in detail in the skeletal muscle physiology, that is the actin, myosin, filaments and all. Okay, and this one muscle spindle, it is known as the muscle fibers are known as intrafusal muscle fibers. Okay, if we enlarge and see the structure of the muscle spindle, it will be like this. Okay, so let me draw this again. We will come back to this diagram. So how exactly it looks? So basically it is around 3 to 12 micrometer in length and lies parallel to the skeletal muscle fibers, and it has around 3 to 10 uh, intrafusal fibers. So again, these intrafusal fibers are of two types. Intrafusal fibers are of two types. One is known as nuclear back fibers, which I am drawing right now. So these things. So at the center there is a bulging, okay, and there are nucleus. This muscle fiber nucleus is present here at the center, and this type of intrafusal fibers which is present in the muscle spindle, it is known as nuclear back fibers. Okay, very simple, nuclear back fibers. Similarly, we have one more set of the intrafusal fiber. These are intrafusal fibers inside the muscle spindle, and that is known as nuclear chain fibers. So this thing is the nuclear chain fibers. Very simple structure, just concentrate here, nuclear chain fibers. So two type of the intrafusal fibers, that is in muscle spindle, nuclear back fibers and nuclear chain fibers. Totally around 3 to 12 such intrafusal fibers will be present in one muscle spindle. Okay, so around 1 to 6 or 6 to 12, totally 12, 3 to 12 such nuclear bag and nuclear chain fibers combination, they form the muscle spindle. Now, important one is the nerve supply to this muscle spindle. So, you know, in this extrafusal fibers, that is the skeletal muscle fibers, it is made up of the actin, myosin filaments. Like here also in the muscle spindle, there is actin and myosin filament complex is there, but it is present at the peripheral parts with the red color what I am highlighting, at the peripheral parts like in the nuclear chain fibers and nuclear back fibers. Okay. At the center there is no myofilament, that is actin and myosin filaments are absent here. Okay. But there are sensory nerve endings which are present in the center here. We need to know the sensory nerve endings and the motor nerve endings. Let us first discuss the motor nerve endings. Okay. So, let me describe a or just draw a line diagram again of the spinal cord, a cut section of the spinal cord. Okay. So, I am just drawing a cut section of the spinal cord. So, you know this part is anterior, it is the front part, anterior horn cells known as anterior horn cells. Okay. Anterior part, anterior horn cells. Okay, this is the posterior part, that is the back side, posterior part. Now, from this anterior horn cells, motor neurons originate and they will supply the muscles. Okay. Now, consider this red color neuron, this is known as alpha motor neuron. So, this alpha motor neuron which is originated from the anterior horn cell, also known as lower motor neuron. So, what is upper motor neuron, what is lower motor neuron? We have discussed in detail in separate video. Please go back and check our playlist of nervous system or physiology, you will get that in detail we have discussed. So, this is lower motor neuron. So, one of the lower motor neurons is alpha motor neuron which will directly connect the skeletal muscle fibers. Okay, skeletal muscle fibers. I will just draw again a line diagram or a rough diagram of the skeletal muscle this one fiber. So, see from the spinal cord, the muscles, different muscles will get nerve supply from the different nerves. So, whatever, for example, C5, C6 nerve root value from the spinal segment C5, C6, it will go to the biceps muscle, right. So, through the alpha motor neuron they will supply to the extrafusal fibers. Remember extrafusal fibers, and here there will be release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. You know that sarcotubular system, how that will take contract and ultimately contraction of the muscle, right. Now, we are discussing the muscle spindle. So, in the center here there is a muscle spindle. Okay, in the these are extrafusal fibers, these are intrafusal fibers made up of intrafusal fiber made up of nuclear back fibers and the nuclear chain fibers. Now, it is connected by one more motor neuron, that is alpha motor neuron connects the extrafusal fibers. Intrafusal fibers of the muscle spindle, this blue color structure is the muscle spindle. So, this muscle spindle is supplied, that is the motor supply is through the neuron, that neuron it is known as gamma motor neuron. Remember this thing, gamma motor neuron. So, gamma motor neuron which originates from the anterior horn cells will supply the muscle spindle. Now, where exactly it will supply is, as I said you, actin myosin filament, these are present at the periphery. So, the gamma motor neuron which are coming from the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord in the muscle spindle, they will supply the peripheral part, that is where the actin and myosin are there, not at the center part. Okay, at the peripheral part. Again, this gamma motor neuron is of two types, dynamic and static. We will discuss about this when we will discuss in detail about the stretch reflex, most probably in the next video. Okay, just timing for the structure of the muscle spindle. Remember this thing, this gamma motor neuron is supplying this actin and myosin filaments, and whereas alpha motor neuron supplies the extrafusal fibers and gamma motor neuron supplies the intrafusal fiber, that is the muscle spindle. Now, from this nuclear back fiber and the nuclear chain fibers, sensory nerves, that is whenever the muscle, I said you it is a stretch receptor or a sensor. So, whenever the muscle is stretched, that sensation is carried to the spinal cord. It is carried through some sensory neurons, sensory nerves. What are that sensory nerve fibers? So, on these nuclear back fibers, there is some annulospiral nerve fibers. Okay, so annulospiral endings, it is called as annulospiral endings like this. Also on the nuclear chain fibers, these are the sensory fibers and these are of type 1A. Remember this very important things, type 1A. Okay, neurons type 1A, which is carrying the sensation whenever the muscle spindle is stretched, that it gets stimulated and action potential is carried through this to the spinal cord, and it will go from the posterior root of the spinal cord. Okay, from the posterior root of the spinal cord it will go through the type 1A fibers, and these fibers are called as primary nerve endings, or the primary this one afferent fibers, or the primary sensory fibers, or primary afferent endings, or primary sensory nerve endings. Okay, primary sensory nerve endings, these are primary. Okay, that can detect the dynamic changes of the muscle spindle, that is even the rate of change of the length, that is how fast the muscle is changing the length. Okay, suppose I am doing it very fast, this rate of change of the length of the muscle is sensed by this type 1A fibers, and it is the information is gone to the spinal cord and ultimately goes to the higher centers. Okay, now this rate is sensed by the type 1A fibers. Now there is something known as secondary, this is primary sensory endings, there is something known as secondary endings also. So on the nuclear chain fibers, not on the nuclear back fibers, on the nuclear chain fibers also there is certain sensory nerve endings that will go to the spinal cord, to the posterior root, and this type of fibers known as type 2. Remember this type, very important, type 1A, type 2 fibers. Okay, and this type 2 fibers again which will go through the posterior part. Okay, and this sensory endings, it is called as secondary sensory nerve endings, secondary sensory nerve endings. So what is the significance of this primary and secondary sensory nerve endings which are coming from this nuclear back fibers and the nuclear chain fibers? Is this primary sensory nerve endings detect the dynamic changes, that is the even the rate of the length, and when the muscles is rapidly stretched or unstretched. Okay, whereas the secondary sensory nerve fibers, they are known as static fibers, these are known as dynamic fibers, known as static fibers. They will detect the change of the length only when the muscle is slowly stretched. Okay, not dynamically, very fast. So very fast this is detected by the primary nerve endings, and very slow by the secondary nerve endings, that is when the muscle is slowly stretched and kept it, then it is detected by this. So ultimately the information from the type 1A and type 2 goes back to the alpha motor neuron, and there is a synapse here. That's why it is known as stretch reflex, the monosynaptic reflex. We will discuss that, and it will send the signal to the alpha motor neuron so that the muscle can contract. Okay, we will discuss in the stretch reflex. Time being, just concentrate on the structure of the muscle spindle. This is the structure. If you draw like this, you will get full marks in your theory examination. Very simple. Just you need to draw a nuclear back fiber, nuclear chain fibers, motor supply by the gamma neurons or the gamma motor neuron. Okay, gamma motor neuron, again two types, primary and secondary, that is dynamic and efferent. Okay, if just simply you draw gamma motor neuron also more than enough. Okay, whereas in the center sensory, type 1A and type 2, just remember. Okay, nuclear back fibers, nuclear chain fibers. One more thing, this type 1A fibers, these are also known as annulospiral endings. What it is known as? Annulospiral endings. Annulospiral endings, type 1A fibers, or the primary efferent fibers, it is also sometimes termed as annulospiral nerve endings. Why it is called as? Because of its binding like that, spiral binding, annulospiral nerve endings. Similarly, this type 2 nerve fibers from the nuclear chain fibers is not present in the nuclear back fibers. Remember, this annulospiral binding or type 8 is present in both nuclear back fibers as well as chain fibers, but nuclear, this one type 2 nerve fibers, this typically flower spray nerve endings or flower spray endings. Okay, it is termed as flower spray endings, typically because of the structure, how it looks. Okay, so this is how this is the structure of the this one muscle spindle. Okay, let me draw, just show you the structure how it is there in your textbooks. Okay, so it consists of both nuclear back fiber, nuclear chain fibers, and this nuclear back and chain fibers, it is supplied by the gamma motor neuron. These are the gamma motor neurons. Again, gamma motor neurons are dynamic and static gamma fibers. Then that are the efferent, that comes from the spinal cord. Okay, now to the spinal cord, that is the sensory fibers are of two types. One is group 1A fiber, that is primary efferent, and group 2 fibers, that is secondary afferent. Primary afferent, also known as annulospiral nerve endings, these carry the sensation from the both nuclear back fibers as well as nuclear chain fibers, whereas group 2 fibers or type 2 fibers will carry the sensation only from the nuclear chain fibers. Okay, nuclear chain fibers. Hope it is very clear. Right now, the structure of the muscle spindle and what is the function of this muscle spindle, why it is present in the muscle. As I already said you, it is a sensor which will sense the change in the length of the muscle, that is the stretch sensitive, it is a stretch receptor, and the most important function of this, it is useful in the stretch reflex. Now, what is stretch reflex, how this muscle spindle is useful in the stretch reflex, we will discuss in the next coming video. So, please subscribe our channel Doctor's Corner and share the link with your friends. We will try to make such informative lectures from all the subjects of the MBBS, right from anatomy to general medicine, surgery and OBG, pediatrics, from the basics to the higher clinical subjects. We will try to make it. So, please subscribe our channel and support our channel and share the link with your friends. Thank you.